Welcome to this edition of The Public Square. I'm Wayne Shepherd with the team here, including Dave Zanotti, Rob Walgate, Melanie Elsey, Alan C. Duncan, and Jeff Sanders. And was it Gomer Pyle who used to say, surprise, 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 right?
Surprise, surprise, surprise.
What a perfect moment.
We're going to talk about some surprises today.
We are. Wayne, this has been the most amazing period of time. Going back to late 2025 to where we are today, two anchors of modern reality, narrative, academic instruction, worldview, however you want to put it, two pillars of what we have been taught for over a generation have come crashing down by the admission of people who built them. Mm-hmm. The first was in the late 2025 when Bill Gates basically issued a memo to the United Nations on global warming saying, in essence, never mind.
Sum it up.
Never mind. Not the threat we thought it was, not really worth going forward with all the hysteria. And by the way, and my money's out of that game now as well. And what's amazing is it literally has turned the entire climate change community with all of its tentacles, and it's turned them into walking zombies. It's nowhere. No, because suddenly the money walked, and so did the issue. Fascinating. Second one has just happened, and it's from, I'm sorry, and if somebody said to me the other day, accused me of being giddy on the radio. So if childlike and giddy are equivalent, then I'm willing to accept the badge of honor of being childlike.
Guilty as charged.
I'm guilty as charged. Welcome to Little Rascals Radio. Here is the AP headline. It says, did the founders create a Christian nation? ? No, comma, but religion did shape their thinking. Now, forget, if you will, all the things that we learned in journalism school about headlining and how to create a headline. Like, was there ever supposed to be a comma in a headline? Not where I went to school, but never. Here it is. Did the founders create a Christian nation? No, but religion did shape their thinking. So that's the way the headline begins. The article is written by Peter Smith, who is a religion writer formerly for the Pittsburgh Tribune and Post and Gazette. He now writes for the AP and other sources. He's extensively written on this subject, so we're not calling into mind his fundamental credentials as a writer. We're just saying that's who he is. And he starts in the article, and basically when he gets done, what you will find is an official refutation, disavowing, and burial of what we were taught in school, which is that the founders were not Christians. They were deists.
Wait a minute for the earthquake to settle here.
Yeah, and let's say it. Let's say it again. Let's say it out loud. Yes, you heard it right. In fact, this article came out, and I caught it in the wee hours of the morning last night. We have another program outline that was all developed, an extensive amount of research on the question of brain research going on in China and what it means, and it's very sophisticated. It's a great story. Can't wait to put this on here. Stop the presses. We got into staff, we got into study, we got into prayer, and it just dawned on me, we cannot let this story go unnoticed because that's exactly what the Associated Press wants. They want this story to go unnoticed. Somebody's got to say it. Somebody's got to say it out loud. And they're losing the debate dramatically because of the rising climate of appreciation, interest, curiosity on the 4th of July and Declaration 250. And so they've got to do something. And this is what they did. And in the 250th year of the celebration of the Declaration of Independence, they finally gave up the ghost on this one. They have decided to haunt us no longer with this myth that the founders were deists because they weren't. Now, right now, we should have a sound effect of champagne bottles popping and party things blowing horns, and angels singing and all that sort of stuff.
Well, to stick with the Gomer motif, he said 3 surprises. You don't have another one up your sleeve, do you?
No, that's it.
Okay. That's enough for now. That's enough for us to digest, I think.
Well, and sticking with all I can say is along with Gomer, well, golly.
Golly.
How about Shazam?
Shazam!
Shazam, Sergeant Carter.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. You've been nipping this in the bud for a long time, Dave.
Yes. An entire lifetime. And so have many historians and authors and advocates and pastors and thought leaders have been going back. And here's the whole thing. When you go back and read the framers, the founders, the first generations of Americans, you read their words and you study their lives through their words, in their journals, in their letters, in their comings and their goings. And you don't just rely on someone who's got a historical degree from a left-wing program to reinterpret reality for you. If you go to the history and do the hard work, you can find all this for yourself. And that's what we've been doing for a lifetime.
Well, when you read the Declaration of Independence and the reference to creation, the reference to our Creator and each of us being created, and then you go on to look at the 50 states that make up the United States, 46 of those states use the word God in their state constitution. 46 of the 50. And many of them, are it's done in the preamble to give as a way to give thanks and to identify where freedom and liberty comes from. So the fact of just looking at all this and understanding it, knowing it, it kind of took a while to get here for the AP. But the rest of us that have read the documents, I mean, it doesn't come as a big surprise.
That's an interesting study. I can remember, Rob, getting started in this work, and one of the things that was an absolute necessity was to go back and to read these state constitutions. I think it's important to understand that we didn't start this little operation of advocacy for the truth based upon the wishes of a billionaire or a university or a super personality type person. We started as honest humans, business people, making a living, trying to raise families who had all been to different forms of education and scholarship. And we basically said, what's the truth? What's the truth? And to be able to know the truth and then to defend the truth, we've had to study all the alternate narratives for an entire lifetime. We're in the situation of advocacy because we believe that Jesus has called us to be his witnesses. And so we are telling a story every day in our lives. The story happens to be the greatest story ever told. The story happens to be true. But we don't just simply walk fearlessly because we know it's true and because, as someone said the other day in a sermon I was in, he said, my dad can beat up your dad. He said that's kind of the mentality that Christians could have if they wanted to, since basically what they're doing is speaking on behalf of the God of the universe. All right. So, but that doesn't hold. That doesn't hold. Never has held singularly. So this isn't just about a bullying authority. We don't wear collars here. We don't wear robes and vestments. You won't find crosses on our rooftops. We're talking about the reality of a biblical worldview in a real history, in real space, in real time, in real lives. So if we were peddling some nonsensical theory for a paycheck, or peddling, as Paul talked about, peddling the gospel for profit, by now we would have been smoked out a long time ago. And if our scholarship is bunk, then there's 4,000 volumes at the top of our library, in the William B. Allen Library, that would also basically be bunk.
Yeah. And Dave, I've been on a few, should I say, speaking engagements at colleges and universities with you where did they politely ask you to leave but I can
in some cases not.
Where sometimes, we take up the position of the rule of law. And I can remember one in particular where we weren't a fan of the government that was writing checks to advocate for a faith or any faith. including Christianity, where that's not the role of the government to spend that money in that way when it comes to certain initiatives. And I think that caught a lot of people by surprise. But we talked about it being the rule of law, and that's what needs to be followed, especially from a constitutional perspective.
Our approach has always been principles first. Principles govern policy, principles govern politics, and that was the same concept in the framing of the Declaration of Independence. So let's walk through Peter Smith's article. It came out on May the 3rd, 2026 at 9:03 a.m. So it was a Sunday morning AP piece. And he was quoting a historian by the name of Greg Fraser. And the first opening quote says, "Neither side really wants to hear what I say," says Fraser, professor of history and political studies at Masters University, a Christian school in Santa Clarita, California. The founders, Fraser says, did not create a Christian republic. Several key founders either rejected core Christian doctrines or were vague enough to keep historians debating. For Fraser, that often disappoints audience of his fellow Christians. Okay. But he says, nor were the founders a cluster of rational deists, believers in a God who set the universe in motion like a clockmaker and then left it alone. Okay. So here's my first premise. Defining terms is everything. So let's talk about this concept of a Christian republic and who invented that nomenclature.
All right, we're off to a great start on the Public Square today. Stay with us. More at thepublicsquare.com and aproundtable.org.
It's too long. They won't pay attention.
No one talks like that anymore. They won't understand.
Just read the summary online.
Don't you learn that in school?
It's above your reading level.
We can tackle that later.
American history is my history. Go to kidsonthesquare.com today and find the KOTS 250th challenge. It's a fun, interactive checklist with crafts, puzzles, recipes, and more. Complete the list and you can become a KOTS 250th scholar.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
So far, we just scratched the surface here of this issue on the Public Square today, but believe me, we're going to go a little deeper here. Okay, Christian Republic, what does that mean, Dave?
Excellent. Where did that term come from? I've spent a lifetime studying the founders, and you will find those words in parallel and references, but I'm unaware of any doctrine, going back to the George Washington Circular Letter of 1783, in which the intention was, here is Christianity, here is the definition of republic, let's merge them together and make them one and the same. That's what we're going to do. That never happened. Why would it? Instead of saying what didn't happen, why don't we look at history from the words and the writings of the founders and talk about what did? But first off, let's start with this. I have for years said that the use of the word Christian in this conversation is intentionally manipulated to make it an adjective that modifies something it was never designed to modify. Christians have always been, in their core understanding of definition, people, individuals, followers of Christ, or as Dr. Allen would say, followers of the way of Christ. Mm-hmm. Now, Christians, the word Christian is designed for people. Now, we use it in all kinds of ways for modification. And so, but that's not its core fundamental meaning. So that's first off. So let's be sure. Are we painting in oil here or watercolors, or what are we doing here with these words? Did they choose to found a republic? So I think that's the question we got to ask. Was America founded as a republic? Was it founded as a democracy? Was it founded as a modified form of a monarchy? What was it founded of? So let's go back to Montesquieu's book. I've got it right here. All right, the 5 inches that Dr. Allen published and translated. Okay, was it a republic?
Yes.
There is no doubt that they founded it as a republic. They specifically said so in many of their writings.
And they founded it as a republic in response to what?
a constitutional monarchy that they came out of.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. All right. We've not talked through this outline, so he's not answering off a piece of paper. They were emerging in their understanding of the form of government that they were choosing to put together, and they were intentionally representing not just a monarchy, but a form of a constitutional monarchy that they considered to be underdeveloped. This is 1776. Britain starts in their concept of their current government in 1215 with the Magna Carta. And the founders were saying between 1215 and today, we don't have what works best to protect our rights and our liberties. Therefore, we declare these self-evident truths.
Since they were excellent students of history and could read the writings of ancient and medieval history in the original languages, they knew that what did work. The Venetian Republic was a model for them. For 1,000 years, the people of Venice elected their own rulers, and they said, there's a good model there. They knew that the Roman Republic, even though it was pagan, was the best model in the ancient world, in the pagan world, but then they also knew about the Hebrew Republic. They were all, whether they believed the Bible was true or not, and most did, they understood that God had founded a Hebrew republic when the people of Israel entered the land in around 1406 BC.
Okay, got to stop right there, all right? Same God, different chapter. Mm-hmm. So if we were looking for a Christian republic, why would Jesus come to establish a Christian republic? His dad had already revealed the Hebrew Republic. Look, here's the books right here in front of me. In fact, if you study the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs' work, or you study the Hebrew Republic by Harvard professor Eric Nelson,
excellent books.
You will discover that God, the God of the Bible, had already pronounced the principles of a republic on earth, a self-governing republic based upon his word. And it was a voluntary agreement based upon the principles of the scriptures that the Hebrews attempted to live out and basically couldn't get it done. And they lost their country and then they were dispersed across the world. But the concept of the Old Testament republic is still there. And it's not a theocracy. It is a republic. It is an agreement, a consensual covenantal agreement. So that model was already there.
So, Dave, when we're talking about not being a Christian nation or a Christian as a modifier, we are just off the publication of an oration which outlines and gives the full text of John Quincy Adams' speech many, many decades ago. And he is describing it laid the the Declaration of Independence laid the cornerstone of human government upon the first precepts of Christianity and gave to the world the first irrevocable pledge of the fulfillment of the prophecies announced directly from heaven at the birth of the Savior and predicted by the greatest of the Hebrew prophets 600 years before. So it's precepts or principles that were laying the foundation based on Christianity, yes?
So, well, let me ask you this question. Let me answer your question with a question. We've got Greg Fraser. We've got the writer Peter Smith. We go down to the American Separation for Church and State. And let's see. There's another professor that's involved here. His name is Fee, I think. All right. So all the people that contributed to this writing and the sourcing that they made to make their positions known and to advocate for their positions, not once is John Quincy Adams mentioned.
Isn't that interesting?
Not once.
Well, they probably would say, I'm trying to be fair here, that, he was not one of the founders, the founding fathers.
That's right. That would be fair.
He didn't sign the Declaration and he didn't create the Constitution. And so that's probably, I'm trying to be fair here. That's probably what they're thinking.
What he was the professor, the instructor, the observer, the eyewitness. He was the founding son.
Yeah.
So he was there, paid attention, watched and that's a great question, Jeff. He paid attention. He watched the Revolutionary War unfolding, the War for Independence unfolding in Bunker Hill at 9 years of age. At 11, he went with his father to represent America in Europe. He was back in working with his dad overseas at the age of 14. He went on to serve in George Washington's administration. He went to college. He became a lawyer after graduating from Harvard, studying for the bar.
Yes.
All right, but under Theophilus Parsons in Newburyport. All right, so now we've got the man who becomes Secretary of State, State Representative, member of the legislature, member of the United States Senate, nominated and confirmed with the Supreme Court, didn't serve but was nominated and served, and then becomes President of the United States. He was there as a child when the Declaration was written, discussed in his presence. He was there when it was signed. He was there when it was fought for. He was there when the principles of the Declaration were implemented into the reality of the Constitution of the United States. He served in every branch of civil government. He served the whole way. He served as President of the United States, then went back into the Congress for 18 years, died in the Congress at his desk advocating for abolition every single day for 17 years in the Congress, and wrote an oration explaining exactly what the Associated Press is talking about right now. On point, exactly. The most credible witness of the founding era, and none of the people in this article even mention that he exists.
Why is that?
I don't know.
Wow. Yeah.
We got to get them a copy of Oration.
Yeah. It's lost,
there you go.
It's lost to history, isn't it? And you've brought it back to us.
These guys live in Madison, Wisconsin. They're part of some think tank. So let's just send them a copy.
Well, some of them do belong to that think tank. By the way, the think tank that's being quoted here from the Associated Press is 2 years old.
The Lumen Group.
Yeah, the Lumen Group, and it's so I'm glad it's there, but I'm just saying it's all of 2 years old. So what we've got is there has been a selective cherry picking of history for decades now, for at least 2 generations. And what's actually happening is honest scholarship is catching up with the propaganda. And this article is the beginning of the acknowledgement that their core tenet of their entire argument, that the framers were deists, is bunk. It's not true. My question is this: if historians, authors, and American media would lie to us for 100 years about this, what else would they lie about?
Something that bothers me is this term Christian Republic, which I can't remember any of the founding fathers ever using that phrase.
Well, therefore, it must not have been one. Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Well, at least they're not saying Christian democracy. I mean,
Yes,
we've
right.
moved like an inch.
Right. But they never, it's clear from their writings that they never intended a government or a nation that was populated only by born-again Christians or Christians that, subscribe to a particular doctrinal statement.
It wasn't exclusionary.
That is correct. And they're very clear about this. But it would be a government that would welcome Christians of any stripe or anybody else of other religions or belief systems that were willing to live under a government that respected everybody's freedom of speech,
Under the
freedom
rule
of
of law,
religion,
sure.
under the rule of law. Now,
Right.
there are some beliefs out there that will not respect that. And a constitutional republic is not a place where they would feel welcome. But for everybody else who feels welcome with that, yes,
That's a big distinction.
They're allowed to live in that peaceful government.
Well, when we come back, Wayne, let's talk about some of the principles of this republic.
Okay, sounds great. And what an engaging conversation today. As always, on the Public Square. Glad to have you along. Thanks for your support. This program only exists because you support it. We appreciate that very much. And we'll be back in a moment. We're having this discussion on the Public Square today in advance of the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And between now and then, when that happens around July 4th, that there's going to be a lot said, a lot written. We're trying to get ahead of that here today, Dave.
Wayne, this is so great. It's an Associated Press article. The headline reads, "Did the founders create a Christian nation? No, but religion did shape their thinking." Notice how the word nation and then republic were already interchanged in the construct of the article. In other words, they keep changing the terms as we go along. And that's because the fundamental principle behind this, what they want to get, their landing zone, where they want to end up with is the idea that America was founded as a secular state and that there is no connection between the Declaration, the self-evident truths, and the Constitution. That's where Americans United for the Separation of Church and State want to take this. They're mentioned in this article significantly, and that's the goal. In other words, the very same people 11 years after they signed the Declaration who fought a war together and made incredible sacrifices, and now we're going to sit down and have a country. They say, forget that Declaration thing. Let's we got a better idea. After fighting this war, let's start a secular nation. And keep anything that has to do with God out of it, because after all, God doesn't really care that much. In fact, we were all deists all along. We were just kidding. Okay, those 4 mentions of God in the Declaration of Independence, sorry, we didn't mean that really. That was just public relations.
Yeah, so back to the title of the piece, it says religion did shape their thinking. What religion? What, paganism? Zeus?
Buddhism.
Worship Buddhism?
That's a very
Islam.
It was
Islam.
No, so they could have said Christianity. Yes, Judaism, and then the fulfillment of Judaism with the Messiah, Jesus Christ coming. So Christianity shaped their thinking.
So the title could have been rewritten. I would retitle it. I would say
that's because you'd want to be honest, Melanie. But this is what happens.
Just hang on. Did the founders create a Christian nation? No, but the precepts of Christianity did shape their thinking.
There you go. You did it.
And when you go to the back portion of the appendix of the book Oration that we put together and just published, and look, we'll get to this. When you go to the back of the book, you'll find an additional addendum, a college class type curriculum article by Dr. W.B. Allen, talking about the best of friends, the harmony between the Declaration and the Constitution, the harmony between the thoughts and the truth claims of the Declaration and the construction of the Constitution. Wayne, that's another thing we've had to do. When we started this organization, we had to get to the bottom of these documents. We had to read the right, the left, the liberal, the conservative, the Christian, the Jewish, the pagan, whatever it was out there about this is what the Declaration is, this is what the Constitution is. We've been around this barn for 45 years. And I'm telling you, when you read this article, it is virtually laughable. I can tell you where we wore out our plow on some of this stuff that these guys are finally surrendering on. And they've never had any logic except to change the terms when they got cornered by the truth. Now, what's the truth? Our interpretation? No, that's just the point. It's what the founders themselves wrote, said, and did.
And I think, again, to go back to some of those state constitutions, and this has been declared unconstitutional, but 7 of those state constitutions had a provision in it that said if you were an atheist, you couldn't hold public office. Now, so that shows you.
Has the Supreme Court ever ruled against that, by the way?
Yes, 1961, Torcaso. He was
Of course, it was the 60s.
Yeah, 1961. Hey. He was an appointed a notary. He was an appointed notary as an atheist, and it was challenged, and it went to the Supreme Court.
Well, why do you think they did that? Why was that in those state constitutions at all? Why? Like, what would be the motive?
Question. Because the presupposition of our form of civil government requires conscience. Because our form of civil government is built upon truth-telling. If you think about it, our entire premise of the responsibility of judicial activity is built upon the premise that when a judge enters the courtroom, he takes an oath to tell the truth. That when a witness appears at the stand, he will tell the truth. That when a plaintiff or a defendant enters the stand, they will promise to tell the truth. Now, if I'm looking for the most significant source of why they would do that based upon their worldview, education, and understanding, I can only go to one place to begin that conversation: the 10 Commandments. That's why the 10 Commandments are on the wall of the United States Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Truth telling is the fundamental basis of justice in civil government. And so if you don't have people that are willing to obey God, how are we ever going to get to people who are willing to tell the truth? Or are they just going to make it up according to their truth until the facts catch up with them?
Yeah, there's an ultimate source of truth.
Yes.
Jesus said, I am the truth.
You know, an inconvenient historical fact is that American law is based in large part upon English common law. English common law comes from Alfred the Great, the only English king who was entitled the Great. And he said that we are going to found our laws upon, guess what, Dave? The 10 Commandments of God. That's what he said. And so our laws, founded on English common law, has its source in what? Historically, the 10 Commandments.
Now,
that's fact.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's go back to Rob's question. And my question to Rob, when did the Supreme Court rule? 1961.
1961.
1776 Declaration, 1787 Constitution, 1789 Ratification. Early years of the Republic, from 1789 to 1961, the Supreme Court left that ban on atheism in state constitutions. Why? Because Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's the First Amendment. The federal government had a ban on religious testing. The federal government, in regards to its scope, would not afford that measure. But the federal government recognized that the states had the right to do that until 1961. Think about that.
Yeah.
It was legal until 1961. I'm not suggesting for a second that we go back there. But what I'm saying is you have to recognize the progress of thought. That the federal government felt the states had the right to protect themselves from atheists who weren't going to tell the truth.
Well, and that doesn't mean that every atheist is going to lie, and I know you're not saying that. But the other thing is,
or that every Christian's going to tell the truth.
Exactly. Yes, believe me.
Disclaimer.
Yeah. But atheism it's not a religion. It's the opposite. It's the anti-religion. It's the religion. That's kind of its whole point. It's kind of weird it gets to be considered a religion. Its whole point is that it's not one.
Now, what did they worship?
Well, and we could write a whole book on that. I'm going to steer us away from there, but it's been fascinating just to go there for a few seconds. But the point is the point. That now we talked about republic, we talked about nation, how they flip terms, they've used terms, and ultimately what the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State wants is a divided world between sacred and secular. And in the realm of law, everything must be absolutely secular. Okay. What do you do with thou shalt not steal?
Oh, boy.
In an absolutely secular world.
Why should I not steal?
Yeah, how do I come up with the thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor? I didn't hurt anybody.
I mean, if you've got more than what I have, but I have the power to take it from you, why not take it from you?
Well, what about the tangential things that are happening right now with the pushing of Sharia law in some communities? Mm-hmm. And, that's not compatible with all of the constructs of the Constitution.
Very true.
So when we come back, Wayne, there's more on this article. We got to do it.
Oh, yeah. There's much more, as a matter of fact. Okay, stay with us. If you joined us late, you can always listen from the beginning online at thepublicsquare.com or on YouTube or with our smartphone app. It's all available to you.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to The Public Square.
Man, this conversation is flying by today. It always does here in the Public Square. But I have a question, maybe just a statement, and that is that all we're talking about here today, clarifying what the founders believed and how it led to principles for founding America. I think a tragic consequence of a misunderstanding of this gives rise to what many people are calling Christian nationalism. That's the charge. Can we discuss that for just a moment?
Well, sure. Christian nationalism, of course, is another one of those blended terms of meaning that's used by people who are anti-Christian or people who are simply anti-religion or people who are just repeating narratives. It's something that's exceptionally poorly defined.
Right.
And of course, it's proof texted throughout the New Testament in a couple of places where Jesus makes comments like, my kingdom is not of this earth. And the misinterpretation, the disastrously hilarious misinterpretation that we use on the God and Caesar conflict between Christ and the officials in Jerusalem the last week of his life, it rips scriptures out of context and basically says religion is personal. It's for you and your family. It's inside the four walls of your church, but it does not have a place to play in public life. And that the founders wanted us to be a secular nation. And if, in fact, you're trying to advocate for Christianity or Judaism or anything else, or Sharia law, you are, in essence, forming a religious nation, which is not what they wanted. So it's an argument built on extremes.
Yeah. Citing Scripture at all, or citing the Ten Commandments, or citing any biblical principle that we believe belongs in our nation today, brings this charge, this shallow charge of Christian nationalism. It's just a knee-jerk reaction, and it's shallow thinking, isn't it?
And it's such dishonest scholarship too. I mean, it's so silly.
It's a way to shut people down. If I, as a Christian, want a place at the table
right.
of government, and I think, well, if the communists can be elected to Congress, or if the jihadists can be elected to Congress, why can't the Christian be elected to Congress? Well, then as soon as I say that, I'm a Christian nationalist, and they try to shut me down.
Right.
Pretty much, right?
Now, to a certain degree, Christians have played into this strategy, unwittingly, I believe, but they've played into it, and we've observed this over 5 decades, is that when Christians enter the marketplace from a position of acting like a special interest group, and advocating for based upon lobbying principles and party affiliations instead of first principles and truth. Because remember, there were no political parties when the country got started. There were people who had a worldview, who were advocating to persuade their neighbors to join in the cause, and they were successful. And that worldview was uniquely biblical. Uniquely biblical. And those ideas prevailed in the establishment of not just a free republic in the war for independence, but in establishing a genuine republic that is absolutely a remarkable reality, which historian Paul Johnson calls the greatest of all human adventures, which John Quincy Adams, let me pull this, got me going from book to book. Let's go back to oration for a second. Let me tell you how John Quincy Adams described this. Here's what John Quincy Adams said. In setting forth the justifying causes for their separation from Great Britain, your fathers opened the fountains of the great deep. For the first time since the creation of the world, the act which constituted a great people laid the foundation of their government upon the unalterable and eternal principles of human rights. You'll notice you won't find John Quincy Adams quoted in this article at all, and chances are very good that these people who've only, they've been reading each other's comic books for so long that they forgot who the people are who actually are betrayed.
Hey, don't insult comic books like that.
Look, I've spent a lifetime studying some of these people. I spent years reading through John Quincy Adams' diaries.
That's why it's so scary to me to listen to people who are running for political office, especially at the federal level, where they're talking about wanting to deconstruct what we have in the Constitution and to dismantle the very foundational principles upon which we were built.
So why would they want to do that? There's many, many reasons. But one goes right back to the Declaration of Independence. God is mentioned 4 times, 4 different names. Well, what? They didn't say the Lord Jesus Christ. They didn't have to. Everybody knew who they were talking about.
Right.
Okay, I mean, people, we interpret so much of what happened through our modern lens, and it's one of the principles of the book Oration, and it's a principle that Dr. Allen and I have talked about for a long time. We talked with David McCullough about it as well, that to understand history, you must get 100 years behind the eyes of the people you're studying to understand where they were coming from and the world in which they were born. Because reality is the reality that they experience, not the reality we lay back on top of them and then interpret.
Very helpful.
Well, and I think we've all experienced that in our lifetimes with family members that went through the Depression, or family members that went through the Civil Rights Movement, or family members that we know when we sit around the table and hear the circumstances that they went through, that's going to be different than maybe what's read about and understood.
And that's why it's so important when you're talking about putting judges into office that you understand that their perspective is originalist or the living, breathing Constitution that can change with culture over time.
Well, when people come to visit us, Wayne, and you've seen this happen at the American Mission Center or any of our offices, they often come in and say, okay, who are you? We talk to them about what we do, who we are, what you do, and say, what do you want? When they say, what do you want? We hand them a copy of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. We hand them the Declaration, and we hand them the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We want what they wanted. That's our answer. Now, if they wanted Christian nationalism, they certainly didn't say it.
No.
They certainly didn't show it because they didn't have to. They understood logic and philosophy and how humans move from worldview to policy to the rule of law. All right, but let's just go one more time on the Christian nationalist thing.
Okay.
All right, so here, a leader recently was quoted in a letter. A quote, "It remains then to be my final and only request that Your Excellency will communicate these sentiments to your legislature at their next meeting, and that they may be considered as the legacy of one who has ardently wished on all occasions to be useful to his country, and who even in the shade of retirement will not fail to implore the divine benediction upon it. I now make it my earnest prayer," here comes the prayer, "that God would have you and the state over which you preside in his holy protection, that he would incline the hearts of the citizens to cultivate a spirit of subordination and obedience to government, to entertain a brotherly affection and love for one another, for their fellow citizens of the United States at large, and particularly for their brethren who have served in the field, and finally, that he would most graciously be pleased to dispose us all to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with that charity, humility, and pacific temper of mind, which were the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion, and without an humble imitation of whose example in these things we can never hope to be a happy nation." Now, that Christian nationalist was George Washington.
Yeah, GW, right.
Writing in 1783, General Washington from the battlefield after we had won the war, talking about what would it take for us to now build a happy nation. And he said, if we model ourselves after the Redeemer and his frame of mind, we have the hope to be a happy nation. That just sounds like a flaming Christian nationalist to me.
Well, and Dave, I think in light of that particular quote and the life and work of George Washington, I think that this article's treatment of George Washington is perhaps the worst thing in it, because they call him enigmatic. They say he kept active in his Episcopal church but avoided sacraments and was also an active Freemason. He spoke about God in terms most people at the time could accept, such as providence or supreme ruler. Well, he also just talked about the divine author of our blessed religion, which can only be Jesus. Mm-hmm. But they failed to mention that.
Well, that was the polite language of the day, to use the term providence, meaning God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've got to call timeout so we can take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to wrap up this discussion this time here on the Public Square. Believe me, these issues never are resolved in one conversation. There'll be more on this coming up, but we're going to take a break. If you have to leave us, please go online to hear the rest of this program, thepublicsquare.com. This whole conversation on the public square began today with an AP News article. Did the founders create a Christian nation? No, but religion did shape their thinking. Well, you've heard us discuss this in detail here today, but I think there's more that needs to be said, Dave.
Yeah, it's kind of lame. And this is what happens, whether you're Bill Gates acknowledging that you've spent billions of dollars and ruined people's lives over your fantasy about global warming because it was convenient, and now it's no longer convenient, and so you've abandoned it. That happened just months ago in a memo to the United Nations. He walked away. So that has literally blown up people's worldviews all over the political left. And it's dismissed and I mean, almost not covered at all. Just a never mind. Now we've got something that's been going on in our country for over 100 years, in which classroom after classroom, generation after generation, were taught that the people who started America didn't really see God as relevant because, yes, he was the creator. We can't get that word out of the Declaration. Can't get it out of there. So what we'll do is we'll redefine what it was as a creator. And the creator they believed in was the watchmaker, clockmaker, who wound it up and said, "See you later, boys, girls, have a good time," and didn't care. And so they were completely on their own. I just read to you one of the most intimate prayers that George Washington printed in public, praying to the God of the universe and the ultimate judge of the universe. And that's the thing that we're really talking about here. At the end of the Declaration of Independence, they appealed for the rectitude of their intentions to the supreme judge of the world. In other words, not only is there a God, but he's watching. And when we get to our last breath, he'll be there. And he is the one with whom we will have to do then. That is what modernity rejects always. Always. And it began in the garden. We don't want a final judge. We just want to do what we want to do. And so we have to literally recreate the entirety of our nation in mythology of historians, ignoring the writings, the lives, the living, the testimonies of the people who put this together, to try to come up with something that basically assuages our conscience, which brings us back to Dr. Allen's famous statement that he delivered in Nashville at a Think conference several years ago, in which he said, America would be a Christian nation if there was never a Christian who lived in it. Because the people who put together the American formula for government built it upon the capacity of people to govern themselves, which is not possible unless they have conscience, moral agency, and the will to do what is right. And to find that possibility, they found it in the Creator God of the Bible and in the revelation of Christ as Redeemer. That's not in the AP story.
No, and neither is the last line of the Declaration, as you referenced earlier, where it talks about having the need for a firm reliance on both the protection of divine providence. The term reliance really stands out to me. It's not like we acknowledge it, but we rely on it from here to in perpetuity.
Yep, it's prayer-like. So this AP article has got a great turn in the final paragraphs. It says, the headline is "Challenging Misconceptions About Deist Founders." All right, here, get this. Here it starts. By the way, another thing I was taught in grammar and English, but I don't know, you're not supposed to start a sentence with "but." You know, with the all right. That's sorry. Anyhow, never mind. CAP. But contrary to popular belief, most founders were not deists. Oh, well, contrary to popular belief, most founders were not deists. This is hilarious. In other words, we take a poll, and that's how we decide who they were and what they did. We take the poll in 2026. Who do you think has propagandized these people for the last 100 years into being told that they're deists, but and they believe it now? But contrary to popular, so it's like now it's our fault that they're deists. So in other words, you propagandize people, you put them in this bondage, and then when all the facts overwhelm your argument, you blame the people that you taught. Those kindergartners should never have believed what we told them K through 12. Those scoundrels, those rascals.
Oh, Dave, I almost lost it yesterday. I was doing social studies homework with my 11-year-old Caleb, and he likes doing it with me because I stop and rant every paragraph.
You too?
Yeah. And the book is not even as bad as it could be. The book's from the 90s, I think. It's not even as bad as it could be.
Yeah. 18 or 19, Alan.
Yeah. They were going on and on about King George and how stupid of a guy he was. And in light of Dr. Allen's recent research and all the new things that are coming out about King George, I just couldn't let it slide. I was literally scratching things out of the book and writing in the margins of his class book. I'm probably going to have to buy the thing now. But
you know, Wayne, that's the third thing that's changed in the last couple of years. The first we talk about global warming. Bill Gates said, never mind. Now we've got the Associated Press and all of these scholars that they've brought forward who are basically saying they were deists. Never mind. They weren't deists. Now, they don't have the courage to say what they were because they still evidently haven't read their writings. Then the third thing was the result of ancient files. Actually, as King Charles said, well, really, it was just yesterday. The files from the founding era in which King Charles acknowledged that his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was actually not a tyrant. And in fact, in the book Oration, John Quincy Adams concedes such. And we pick up on that in the book and we describe what happened. That John Quincy Adams in 1837 says, we overplayed our hand on that one. Yeah, it was bad, but he wasn't really as bad as we made him out to be. Now the English files have revealed, and Dr. Allen has been one of the people who was granted access to those files and written about it based on his work on Montesquieu, in which he said, he discovered that King George III was actually interpreting Montesquieu himself as a young man and was highly engaged in a process of reforming the British government, and that he saw some of what the Americans were doing was making sense according to that study. And Dr. Allen has a published article, which we'll link here on show notes, 3 18th century revolutions, British, American, and French, 3 pathways to modernity. It's a phenomenal article that explains the reclamation, if you will, of King George III as a scholar of governmental reform.
It all makes Gomer sound real smart, doesn't it? Surprise, surprise, surprise.
And we do this on the public square. And our hope and prayer is that by expressing this, people who care will share these thoughts and ideas and articles with others, because you're not going to read about it in Associated Press.
We've talked a lot today about the book An Oration that you co-wrote with Dr. William B. Allen. Many of our listeners may not know this book is available, and any proceeds from this book go right into the work of the American Policy Roundtable, right?
Exactly, as do all the proceeds from the book First that Dr. Allen wrote the introduction on and mentored me in putting together the leadership principles of George Washington. And you can go for free to YouTube right now and watch the interview that Dr. Allen and I did from George Washington's home, from Mount Vernon. And you'll see many of these conversations as well. And by the way, on that point of Freemasonry, this again was brought up that Washington was an active Mason. No, you can't find that. Not there. Yeah, the Masons wanted him like everybody else wanted him, so they worked hard to join him. Yeah, and he was a guy who was not a joiner, but was reluctant to offend people that were trying to incorporate him. But he was not an active Mason.
That's scholarly work done right there. All right, Rob, the contact information for people who want to get a copy of this book, An Oration.
They can visit us at aproundtable.org or thepublicsquare.com. And all of our publications they can find there.
All right. Well, this article grabbed our attention, didn't it? And it sure made for great conversation today and great instruction from all of you on the team here. So thank you all, Dave, including you, our leader. Thank you.
And may the God who is not a deist bless America.
Thanks for listening.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.